The SS Alkimos, originally named the Viggo Haunstein, was built in 1943 as part of the U.S. Liberty Ship program during the Second World War. The program was designed to quickly produce a fleet of merchant ships at a low cost, using hulls made from steel that would be quickly welded together. Because of this, corners were cut, and quality in these ships would often be questionable. There would be many cases of equipment malfunctioning, entire sections detaching at once, and even cases of ships collapsing in on themselves while at sea. On October 11, 1943, the Viggo Haunstein was undergoing construction. During this process, however, a group of welders were accidentally sealed inside the ship's hull, and despite their screams for help, they would not be found until the next day, long after they had all unfortunately suffocated to death. Once the ship was fully operational, it was issued to a Norwegian merchant fleet, with the primary use of transporting guns and ammunition throughout the Mediterranean. The ship would quickly earn a reputation amongst the crew for being allegedly haunted, with some even considering it to be cursed. Crew members would often report strange equipment malfunctionings, light flickerings, and loud static hissing emanating from the radios for no apparent reason. Several crewmates would report how eerily cold it was on the ship, despite the warm climate in which they sailed. Some men would even refuse to enter the lower decks alone due to the ominous atmosphere that resided below. In May of 1944, the Viggo Haunstein was reassigned to the coast of Naples, Italy, where a young woman by the name of Maud E. Stein would be brought on board as a radio operator. Stein originally wanted to fight in the war, but Allied countries at the time did not allow women into service, resulting in her signing aboard the Norwegian merchant fleet. However, less than 3 months into her service, Stein was shot dead by another crewmate in one of the lower cabins. The motive behind this murder was never discovered, as the gunman turned his weapon on himself not long after sending her to an early grave. Due to the grisly nature of her death, the military would cover up the murder and claim that Stein was killed by enemy fire. After the war, the Viggo Haunstein was purchased by a commercial shipping company located in Greece, and was renamed to the SS Alkimos. Despite her seemingly fresh start, the ship's haunting reputation preceded her. Many crewmen would report similar incidents as were reported during the war, including tools being moved on their own, and disembodied voices throughout the ship's lower cabins. Some had even claimed to have seen disturbing ghostly apparitions while in the lower decks, particularly the engine room. The weight of her cursed reputation became so heavy that many sailors would outright refuse to serve on the ship, and the ones that did considered the presence on board to be evil. The SS Alkimos' later career would not be very successful either, as in March of 1963 the ship was caught in a devastating storm off the coast of Australia, leaving her badly damaged and in need of serious repairs. The ship was towed to Fremantle, Australia, where the repairs would be made over the next few months. However, seemingly out of nowhere, the ship caught fire and was once again badly damaged. From there, the plan was to tow the now brittle Liberty ship to Hong Kong for more lengthy repairs, but only minutes after leaving harbor, her tow line snapped, and the ship ended up beached only a few hundred feet away from shore. While it remained fully intact, the ship could not float on its own, and the lower decks were all flooded to maximize stability, halting any towing efforts and leaving the SS Alkimos to remain where she lies. The crew was all evacuated, with the exception of a single caretaker, who remained on the ship for several months. It is rumored that this caretaker was driven insane while in isolation on board the ship, but what we do know is that he reported hearing sounds ranging from distressed moans to faint whispers from all over the ship. He claimed to have seen blood leaking from within the walls, and a particular, ominous shadow figure that resided in the engine room. Over the next following years, few attempts of moving the ship were made, with all of them ending in failure. On one occasion, the SS Alkimos randomly broke free from its anchor chain on a clear and windless night, and drifted towards the treacherous reefs nearby, almost as if it were trying to end its own life. Simultaneously, as the ship drifted towards what seemed to be the end of its road, it mysteriously caught fire. once the ashes had settled, it was decided that the ship was simply too damaged to be repaired, and a salvage effort was quickly put underway. However, almost as soon as workers began salvaging the ship for parts, the effort would be halted by a second mysterious fire. From this point, any attempts at salvaging the remains of the ship were abruptly halted by strange misfortunes. Worker injuries on board skyrocketed, tools and equipment regularly malfunctioned, and a third mysterious fire would even start before much progress could be done. Workers would also report feeling, hearing, and seeing unexplainable and disturbing things while on board, with one woman in particular being mysteriously pushed over by what seemed to be nothing. Not long after, this woman would fall very ill and unfortunately suffer a miscarriage as a result. By 1969, several salvaging crews had refused to step on board, and the salvaging effort was officially considered a failure, finally cementing the ship's cursed reputation in history. To this day, the remains of the SS Alkimos remain where they lie, beached off the coast of Western Australia, and as if to only add to her haunted reputation, several travelers in nearby towns have experienced great misfortune over the past 50 years. In the 1970s, a plane flying directly over the ship's remains would mysteriously crash, killing all 3 passengers inside. Several divers would go missing in the area, with some of their remains even being found within the lower decks of the ship. Several researchers would fall deathly ill and need to be hospitalized shortly after examining the wreckage, and countless stories of engine failure, near drownings, and accidents all became common folklore amongst the local population. Today, the wreckage of the SS Alkimos can be located just north of Perth, Australia, off the coast of the Alkimos Beach. The chilling remains of the cursed ship even being visible during low tide, almost glaring back at the living world from beyond the grave. Traveling and tourism to the area is encouraged, with a historical monument being built not far from the ship's gravesite. But be warned, to this day her sinister reputation precedes her, and any who wander too close, or tread in unwelcoming waters, may be subject to the wrath of the cursed ship. Observation Point Rock, located in southern Afghanistan, is notorious amongst servicemen in the U.S. military for being one of the more unfortunate places to be stationed in the Middle East. The observation point, located on a 30-foot tall hill deep in the valleys of the Helmand province, have always been strategically valuable to any occupying military forces due to its higher elevation. However, this also made OP Rock a prime target for any attacks from enemy forces, leading to an unprecedented amount of bloodshed over the past 40 years. According to local folklore, OP Rock was built upon a mass grave on what is considered to be cursed or forbidden land, and thus is protected by supernatural powers. During the Soviet-Afghan War, countless Soviet bombs failed to detonate near the observation point, and many tanks that dare approach would sink into the ground, seemingly being swallowed whole by the cave systems that resided below. However, sometime in the early 1980s, the Soviets managed to seize control over OP Rock, and with their victory, slaughtered nearly all the Mujahideen fighters defending the outpost. Their bodies were all buried in a shallow mass grave near the base of the observation point. The Soviets remained in control of OP Rock for the remainder of the war. That is, until the Taliban rose to power in the 1990s. A fierce battle ensued over the small observation points, leading to a devastating Soviet defeat. As a result, countless Soviet soldiers lost their lives during the firefights, and those who surrendered were brutally executed by the new standing Taliban forces. These soldiers were all buried in the same mass grave as the Mujahideen fighters that came before them, no more than 3 to 5 feet below the surface of OP Rock. By the time the U.S. military made its way into Afghanistan, the soil of OP Rock was already stained with the blood of hundreds, if not thousands, and that number would only increase as American and Taliban forces would routinely battle around this small outpost. Despite the primary threat of enemy gunfire or artillery, there were many other disturbances that would leave U.S. service members uneasy. Countless soldiers tell stories of digging up human remains within their first hours at O.P. Rock, finding it almost impossible to dig effective trenches without disturbing the mass grave. Many soldiers would also report strange paranormal occurrences, ranging from an intense fluctuation in temperature all around the outpost to sightings of countless full-bodied apparitions around and within the perimeter of the base. One of the more common occurrences, however, would be a strange static noise that would overtake any active radio frequencies for no apparent reason, with some even claiming to have heard Russian and Arabic voices speaking through the static. Generally, the entire outpost carried an additional heavy and sinister atmosphere, as reported by nearly all the service personnel stationed at O.P. Rock. The paranormal events wouldn't stop there, as U.S. Marines and British soldiers stationed at O.P. Rock during the late 2000s would have a particularly haunting experience. Muzzle flashes without the sounds of gunshots would frequently light up the surrounding mountains, keeping all service personnel on high alert. A trained service dog by the name of Ugly Betty would often bark and growl at seemingly nothing within the outpost. Full-bodied apparitions would often appear not far in the distance, lacking any heat signature through thermal imaging, and disappearing as quickly as they came. Disembodied voices in both Russian and Arabic would often be heard off in the distance, and sometimes even within the outpost. On one occasion, a group of what appeared to be Soviet troops were spotted lined up not far from the base of the camp. These troops were all seen and identified by several U.S. Marines. However, as soon as they were approached, all of these troops seemingly disappeared into thin air. Other stories tell of blood-curdling screams being heard over radios or off in the distance. Others tell of whispers being heard over their shoulders when no one else is around. Other service members casually speak of coming face to face with lingering spirits, even being spooked enough to draw their weapon. Despite the countless tales of hauntings at O.P. Rock, one incident stands above the rest in abnormality. One particular night in 2009, not long after the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, all seemed quiet at the small observation point, and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. That is, until rapid machine gun fire rained down in all directions towards the small group of Marines defending the outpost. Each Marine present recounts the terrifying encounter, from the sudden pop of machine gun fire to the zip of bullets overhead, to the unknowingness from where exactly the gunfire was coming from. It seemed as though it was coming from every direction, everywhere. Even the distinct sound of an RPG could be heard firing, then exploding, repeatedly throughout the ordeal. Minutes passed, and eventually the gunfire stopped, and the Marines, who were all quite shaken up, decided to remain under cover, anticipating another attack. Luckily, a second attack never came, and as soon as the sun began to rise, the Marines left their trenches and began assessing the damage to their surroundings. Disturbingly, not a single bullet hole could be found, nor could any evidence of an RPG explosion or any damage to the outpost. Additionally, not a single Marine was wounded during the encounter, and if every single Marine present didn't witness the same thing, one would suspect nothing even happened to begin with. Years passed, and stories about O.P. Rock would continue to arise, with the outpost earning itself a uniquely disturbing and haunting reputation. Some would consider this quite the feat, considering the military doesn't have much room for thought in terms of the paranormal. Soldiers are expected to be logical and pragmatic, especially during a time of war. And for a place to be so disturbing that it completely shifts someone's view on the paranormal, or even makes one question their own sanity, all within the span of a 2-week deployment, only adds to the story's credibility. As previously addressed, the haunted reputation of O.P. Rock has been a staple of its history. Locals living in Afghanistan have considered this area cursed for hundreds of years, having been built upon centuries of bloodshed. From Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan, to both world wars, this area of Afghanistan in particular has seen invasion after invasion and an uncountable amount of mass graves. If there were a place on this earth that was truly a conduit for the paranormal, Observation Point Rock would be a strong contender. In every conventional way it would make sense, as the centuries of bloodshed could only harbor negative energy. However, there is a broader point to make about the psychological effect of war, specifically how trauma, isolation, and fear can manifest itself in particular ways, sometimes blurring the line between real and supernatural. Either way, the mystery of O.P. Rock remains an anomaly, and the tale also serves as a grim reminder of the mental scars and trauma left behind after the dust of war has settled.